Greetings, students. So this module I am recording for those who were not in class when we cover this. There will be 4 secret words peppered in throughout the recording, and I ask you to write these words down because you'll need to turn them in when you complete your module workbook. So here we go. So this is Module 7A, Child Development from Birth through Age 8. Getting started, I'm share with you the 4 learning objectives. The first one is to name the milestones for each developmental domain. And remember, the developmental domains are cognitive, physical, social, emotional, and language that are typical for children from birth to 8 months of age. So we're going to learn about what kids can do at different ages. The second thing we're going to look at is how genetics, environment, culture, and a child's temperament influence a child's development. Third, we're going to discuss the importance of understanding and applying developmentally appropriate practices in the care of infants. And finally, we're going to look at patterns of child development just to see what kids do during this phase of infancy. All right, so part 1, understanding general development. So what I ask you to do is to take some time and write down in your student workbook what you think development is. Now that you have written that down, I will share what the module's definition of development is, which development is growth and change over time. Important words in there are growth and change, as well as time. So development is anything that is growing or changing in a child as time progresses. The next thing we do in our module coverage is to talk about prenatal development. So while the module really focuses on birth to 8 months, so much development happens before a child is born, and I wanted to discuss that with our students in our class. Lots and lots and lots of good information is available on the web should you want to learn more about what happens when a baby is developing inside their mother's body. I share one graphic with you here, starting at 1 month and going all the way to 9 months, kind of just showing you how the baby's size increases and how different body parts develop at different times. You'll notice between 8 and 9 months, that the baby has shifted in the mother's womb and is now head down because this is how most babies are born. If they're not born this way, they are born in a breech method, which is when their feet come out first. This slide, take a little bit of time to look at, shows some different infographics. Infographics are just pictures that people have made that help us to understand a concept. Up in the upper left is human embryonic and fetal development, kind of showing what happens between 3 and 38 weeks. Down below is the embryo fetus, and then all the weeks up to 40 weeks, kind of just showing you how the baby's size increases gradually over that time. The graphic in the middle talks about birth, and it says that birth happens approximately 270 to 280 days after conception. So the gestational period for a human baby is between 270 and 280 days, which is about 9 calendar months. And then the last one on the right shows fetal development from fertilization of the egg all the way to birth. And it talks about the first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester. This next slide I included in the presentation because it shows critical development. So as you look at the infographic on the left, you're going to see the brain and spinal cord, heart, arms, legs, ears, eyes, teeth, palate, which is the upper part of our mouth, and external genitals. So it shows when these things develop, when the baby is in utero. And it also shows when most harm can be done to the baby. So it shows where major structural defects can occur and where minor defects can occur. The reason I showed this one is because I want students to know that the behavior of the mother can have a significant impact in how the baby develops. I have shared the story that I had a child in my care one time who had fetal alcohol syndrome, and what this meant was that his mother drank when she was pregnant, and the child had very significant impact from that drinking that the mother did. The child looked very different than a typically developed child, had a lot of learning issues, and the sad part was that the child was going to have those issues throughout their life, from being a child to being a much older adult, and it was all because of what the mother did when the child was in her body. So want to share that with all of you. The graphic on the right is from healthychildren.org, which I believe is a thing that you need to fill out in your workbook. And this is just a really helpful website from the American Academy of Pediatrics, just showing what happens prenatal, baby, toddler, preschool, grade school, teen, and young adults. So I would encourage you to check that out if you want to learn more about development. The next slide here is one that you will need to watch by clicking on the included link in this assignment, because there are several things that you're going to need to fill out in your workbook based on information you're going to learn about in the video. At the conclusion of this video, I talked about kind of my son's development, and as I've shared in class before, he was born prematurely. He was born at 26 weeks, which is between the 6th and 7th month, and when he was born, his eyes were still fused shut, because that usually starts to open sometime in the 6th month. So his eyes were fused shut, so we were able to see his eyelids slowly open and see his eyes open. And a lot of the things that normally happen in utero in 6, 7, 8, and 9th month were things that happened after he was born. So one example is his lungs were very poorly developed when he was born, so he received a lot of mechanical breathing help. He received a lot of medicines to help his lungs to develop. So hopefully you enjoyed watching that video and learned a lot about what happens while a baby is developing inside the mother's body. The reason I'm not able to show that video as part of this presentation is because PowerPoint does not allow videos like that to show, so you'll have to watch that separately. Part 3 of this presentation is on developmental domains and principles of infant development from birth to 8 months. Shown here is a baby, not sure how old they are. But this is getting back to the official content that is part of the module. The prenatal stuff was kind of extra that I threw in for you. Shown here is a little chart, and just to help you remember, the 4 domains of development are cognitive, social emotional, language, and physical, and then at the center is the whole child. So I like this diagram because all these different areas of development are happening simultaneously. A child is developing language, at the same time they're developing socially, emotionally, at the same time they're developing cognitively and physically. So we always want to remember to look at the whole child, even though we're focusing on different areas of development. I want to share with you 4 principles of growth and development. So the first one is a development progresses from head to toe. So I encourage students in class to touch their head and then to look down at their toes and just know that when they're little, their development started in head and went to toe. The second principle is a development progresses from the inside out. So it starts at your midline and then goes out to your arms and eventually to your toes and your feet and your fingers. The third principle of growth and development is that development follows predictable stages. So this will happen, then this, then this, then this, then this. So we're going to look a little more in depth at that in a couple slides. And the last principle is that children develop at various rates. So we can't look at all 12-month-olds and think they're going to be in the exact same place because development happens at various rates for various children. The next slide here shows cephalocauda development, which is the fancy term to define how development happens from the head to the toe. An infant will develop control of the muscles of their neck, followed by muscles in their upper body, followed by muscles in their upper legs, lower legs, then feet, then toes. So if you've ever held a brand new baby, you know that you have to support their neck. You have to hold their head because their neck isn't strong enough to hold their head yet. So development starts up at the head, goes neck, and follows downward. And this explains why most infants will crawl first, then they'll stand supported, either holding somebody's hands or holding on to perhaps a piece of furniture or a toy. Then they will stand, first supported and then unsupported, and then they're going to walk with support, like holding on to something or creeping along a couch like that, and then finally they will walk independently. So this is how we understand how development takes place from head to toe. The next part is that development happens from the center of the body, the inside of the body, to the outside, which is called proximodistal. Proximodistal describes how development begins at the center or midline of the body and moves outward toward the extremities. An infant will typically gain control of the muscles in their trunk and arms before they're able to control their hands and fingers. Fingers and toe muscles are the last ones to develop on an infant. I shared an example in class of a baby that comes to our house named Eloise, and we've been able to watch her develop. She started at about 6 months. First, she was able to move her arms, then she was able to reach for toys, then she was able to grasp toys. Now she's able to take those toys and move them from one hand to another. So her development very much started at the midline and then worked itself outward. And then the last thing here is that babies develop at various rates of development. So the infographic here kind of shows how a baby goes from lying on their back to standing, but we can't expect all babies to do things at the same time. You may have a baby who walks very early and a baby who walks late. So we just need to remember that babies are going to develop skills and abilities at various rates. While infant development progresses in a predictable way, some infants develop skills earlier than others and others later. The rate of development varies from infant to infant. At this point, you will need to stop this presentation and watch another short video talking about milestones. After the video in class, we talked about milestones, and milestones are just really things that babies accomplish at different ages in their first year. So I encourage you to watch that video and answer the questions in your notebook. The next thing we talked about in class in this module was part 4, factors that influence development, which are temperament, genetics, environment, and culture. The module provided this graphic for us, showing temperament, genetics, culture, and environment all as arrows pushing in on the child because all of these things influence or impact the child's development. Now we're going to look at these individually. First of all, I have a little picture of a genetic string, and genetics, physical characteristics such as brown hair and blue eyes, but they also include conditions such as diabetes and traits such as strength and flexibility. So a child's genetics, things that they get from their birth parents, impact or influence their development. The second one down here looks at environment and culture. So picture there is a little child with a little train that they may have put together, and this shows that they have an environment that is kind of rich, and they have things to play with and things to learn from. So this picture I chose to represent environment and culture. Other parts of this, birth order, the emotional climate of the home, whether it's a happy home or a stressful home, a busy home, whatever kind of home it is, that will impact the child's development. A child's ethnicity, family traditions, all these things have an impact on the overall development of a child. The next slide focuses on environment and how environment shapes a child's potential. Also, culture is a part of the environment which includes values, rules, customs, and rituals. And all this can impact how a child develops. In class, I shared an example of a cultural practice for some cultures where they don't want children eating independently when they're young. So kind of the culture that I grew up in, probably many of you grew up in as well, is we wanted our kids to become self-sufficient as soon as they could and to be able to eat on their own. But some cultures are very different where the parent still feeds the child at 2 or 3 years of age. So the child is still fed by spoon by the parent, and that is a cultural difference that has an impact on a child's development. Part 5, we are taking a closer look at temperament from the module. And temperament is defined as traits which make up an individual's style of behaving. This will make more sense in a little bit when we look at examples of such traits. Traits include our natural responses or our innate responses. How does a child adapt to new people or situations? Does the child need to be a mover, or are they okay sitting still? And then how are the child's eating and sleeping patterns? So these things all make up their traits or their temperament. And even as high school students or as an adult, we still have these traits that make up our temperament. Understanding a child's temperament helps parents and caregivers to best interact with the child. Now we're going to look at 10 temperament traits that were provided in the module. First one is activity level, the amount of physical motion during activities. Some children are calm and slow moving versus other children are always moving. They just don't seem to want to sit still, and that is a temperament. The next one is approach or withdrawal, which is a person's initial reaction to new experiences. Think about yourself. Are you slow to warm up when something is new, or are you very outgoing and jump right in? All of us and all children have different temperament with regards to approach and withdrawal. The third one is adaptability, how easily a person adjusts to change in routine. Some of us like every day to be consistent, so we are slow adapting, versus others are more flexible and each day can be a little bit different and we adapt quickly. The fourth one is sensory sensitivity. How sensitive is a person in each of the sensory channels? Pain and touch tolerance, taste, smell, sound, sight, and light. So some children are very, very affected by noise and by busy activity, and they're just really highly sensitive. Others not so much. So when you're working with children, it's helpful to understand their temperament with regards to sensory sensitivity. Number five is intensity of reaction, which is the amount of energy a person uses to express their emotions. So you probably fall somewhere on this, and I fall somewhere on this. Some of us are very dramatic and very intense and very emotional, and others are more mild. We're just kind of a little bit emotional, but not very much. Number six on the temperament definitions is distractibility. How easily a person's thought processes or attention are interrupted by things going on around him or her. Some people are very focused and nothing really distracts them, versus others are really easily distracted and easily diverted. If you have a lot of difficulty focusing, then it makes sense for you to sit in the front of the classroom, because in the back you're going to see everything that takes place in front of you. So when working with students, it's good to know how they are on distractibility as part of their temperament. Number seven here is persistence, which is the length of time a person continues to make an effort, especially when the task gets hard. So some people with low persistence give up very quickly, versus somebody who is very persistent is more determined, and they're going to try to see a task through to its completion. The eighth thing that we have here for temperament is the quality of mood, the amount of pleasant, joyful, and friendly behaviors compared to unpleasant, frowning, and negative behaviors. Pictured here are Debbie Downer and Susie Sunshine, which are people who vary in their quality of mood, which is a temperament. Number 9 and 10 is shown on this slide. Regularity, which is the predictability of biological functions such as hunger, sleeping, and elimination, and daily routines and patterns. So some people, like this person pictured on the bottom here, has a calendar showing a lot of structure and routine, and they thrive in routine, versus others may be more happy-go-lucky, maybe unstructured, irregular, and they don't really need a routine. And then the last one down here is emotional sensitivity, which is the ease or difficulty with which a person responds emotionally to a situation. So some people are really unaware of their own emotions and kind of insensitive, versus others are very aware of their emotions and highly sensitive. Following this, we watched a third video, which is called Navigating Your Child's Temperament, and I encourage you to watch this video as well. At this point, we began our day 2 of credential training, and we started off with developmentally appropriate practice and infant care. And I'm going to define developmentally appropriate practice for you here. Developmentally appropriate practice is individualized, responsive care which is just right for the child's age, cultural context, and personality. Another way to define developmentally appropriate practice is meeting the child where they're at. So you don't have a preconceived notion of the child should be like this. Rather, you learn about the child and try to meet them exactly where they are. Developmentally appropriate practice consists of 3 important components. The first one is knowledge about child development and learning. It's really important for teachers who are living and having a developmentally appropriate classroom to know child development well and know how children learn best. The second is knowing what is individually appropriate. So again, meeting each child right where they are and providing individually appropriate experiences and reactions and interactions with that child. And then the third part is knowing what is culturally important to that child and the family that that child comes from. So that is an overview of developmentally appropriate practice. But again, I think it's really meeting children where they are. Next in class, we watch this video, and I encourage you to watch it as well. And in the video, you're going to see 6 or 7 babies, and all these babies seem to be at a very different stage in their development. This shows us that predictability, that kids go from this to this to this, and it also shows us that variability in how children can differ. So I encourage you to watch that video, and you're going to see babies in different stages of development. If you were to work in an infant classroom someday, you might have all these babies in one classroom, and it becomes very busy, but your job as a teacher is to remember where each baby is in their development. Part 7 of this teaching looks at developmental characteristics from birth to 8 months. And actually, the first slide focuses on just the first 3 months of life. The module teaches that the period from birth to 3 months is a period of transition for the baby, a time where a lot of change is happening. Infants rely on reflexes until learned responses are developed. And infants learn through their senses, and stimulating all the senses is essential for brain growth and development. So I grabbed a reflex to show here. I found a picture of what is called the rooting reflex. And what you would do with a very young baby, less than about 3 weeks of age, is you would touch their cheek, kind of stroke their mouth, and the baby would turn their head toward that. And the reason that the baby does this rooting reflex is because they're hungry. Turning toward the finger helps the baby to turn toward the nipple, be it be a mother's nipple or be on a bottle. So the function and the purpose of the rooting reflex is so babies can get nutrition by eating. As reflexes give way to purposeful movements, babies begin to respond to stimuli in the environment. During this time period, all areas of development are rapidly changing. So from 3 to 8 months, you're going to see a lot of changes in a baby just because they rapidly develop in their first year of life. Some developmental characteristics that we would see in a baby include a social smile. So if they see a familiar face smiling at them, they might smile back and give you a social smile. They're really going to look for faces that they know and be more responsive to those. There will come a time when babies have something called stranger danger or stranger anxiety, where they will not respond favorably to an unfamiliar face. Babies, another developmental characteristic is they respond to and anticipate play. They're going to play games like peekaboo with you and respond when you play that with them. Also, a baby's visual acuity, their ability to see, they can start to see further away. One thing we learn is that babies, when they're first born, their sense of sight is really their weakest sensory modality. But as they get older, they can see further away. When babies are first born, they can really only see very, very close up. So that's why when a parent holds a baby in their arm, the baby can see the parent's face because they're very close to the parent's body. Also, in the first year, babies learn to grasp objects. This is showing that they have some hand-eye coordination where they can see something, reach out and grab it. And they'll also learn to pass things from hand to hand. A few more characteristics, baby babbling and laughing. So a baby's going to just start making some sounds, trying out their vocal cords. No real meaning is attached. The baby that we have at our house likes to babble a lot. And it's really important whenever they're making sound that the caregiver go back to them and make sounds as well. So you're kind of communicating, kind of having a conversation with the baby in response to the sounds that they are making. This is encouraging of the baby, and this helps the baby know that they have an impact on the world around them. Another characteristic of babies is they begin to roll over. Typically, they roll from their tummy to their back first, and then they'll be stuck there for a few days, and then they will learn how to move to roll from their back to their tummy. So I didn't mean you leave the baby there for a few days, but I meant a few days later, they will develop the ability to roll in both directions. Another characteristic is babies begin to sit with support. So as their torso or their trunk strengthens, they're going to be able to sit up. One thing that you can do with a baby that's starting to sit up is you can be behind them to help catch them if they start to fall, if they lose their balance. There's also something called a boppy pillow, which is a little kind of a C-shaped pillow that the baby sits inside of, and then if they start to tip, the pillow helps them absorb their fall. And then the last characteristic that we're going to look at here is crawling. So crawling can take on several forms. Pictured here on the right is a baby just on their belly, so they may be kind of dragging themselves along the floor. When they get a little more developed, then they'll be able to crawl using their hands and their knees. The next slide focuses exclusively on sensory development, the first sense being sight. And as mentioned earlier, this is the least developed sense at birth. Babies can't see very far, and babies really like to see patterns. They like black and white. That contrast is something that babies are drawn to. Hearing, babies are soothed by the rhythmic noises such as a ticking clock. I know when my kids were babies, we had a little sound machine, and it actually was supposed to replicate the sound of what it would be like to be in the mother's womb. So that was supposed to be a soothing sound for babies to hear. The next is taste, and that's why I chose this picture. The babies prefer sweet over sour when it comes to taste. Touch and feel. Babies love the feel of skin-to-skin contact. So as I shared in class, when my son was a little boy, he was premature, so we did something called kangarooing with him. So just like a kangaroo has a pouch, we would hold him skin to skin, so he was warm in our hold. Next is smell. Babies can start to pick up a mom's scent in just a few days after birth, so they can recognize who mom is by the smell. Another sensory development thing is pressure. Babies enjoy being swaddled and massaged. When I first saw a baby being swaddled, it looks like they're getting rolled up kind of like a burrito, and they can't really move their arms or legs, but they like that feeling. And I would think that that might be because that's what it was like in the womb. So swaddling is often a good calming thing for a baby. And then the last one they talk about is movement. Babies often like rocking, so perhaps you're holding them in a chair and rocking. They may enjoy sitting in a swing, or they may enjoy the movement from a car ride. The next three slides focus on attachment, which we learned about earlier in the year. But attachment is the relationship or bond which develops between an infant and a caregiver. Infants are born with a need to develop a connection with a parent or caregiver, so basic needs will be met. Babies don't know how to feed themselves, they don't know how to get a bottle, they don't have the ability to change their own diaper, so they really need to connect with a parent or caregiver just to meet those basic needs. The primary attachments that a baby has, or the primary bonds, are usually with parent or parents. And then secondary attachments are very important as well, and they're formed with other caregivers. Could be grandparents, could be a teacher at a child care center. So secondary attachments are formed with other caregivers. So why does attachment matter? Attachment is essential for the foundation of a healthy personality. The bullets on this page say that good attachment helps us to attain our full intellectual potential, develop a conscience, helps us to cope with stress or frustration, helps us develop relationships, and handle worry and fear. So just as a baby needs to connect with other people for those benefits, I think teenagers and adults need to have relationships as well to help us with the things that we need assistance with. The next slide focuses a little bit on brain development and attachment's relation to that. Healthy attachments are an essential part of brain growth. Healthy attachments need to happen during infancy, when most of the brain growth occurs. So as we've learned, tons and tons of development happens before age 5, and lots of brain development happens during the very first years and the very first months of infancy. Babies need to have all their senses stimulated for synapses to occur. So synapses are these little connections that form in our brain, and they're based on experiences that we have or stimulation of our senses. Holding, rocking, swaddling an infant not only assist in forming the necessary attachments or bonds, but is also crucial for brain development. Part 8 focuses on some topics in infant development from birth to 8 months of age. First of all, sleep patterns. As infants mature, sleep patterns become more predictable and routine. So when a baby is first born, you will often hear a parent say that they don't sleep through the night, but as they mature, they may begin sleeping through the night better. Providing consistent care which follows a predictable routine will help the baby to begin to develop those positive sleep habits and routines. Day and nighttime sleep have different functions, which I will show you here. Daytime naps that a baby might have will reduce their stress, the stress they experience in their environment, versus nighttime sleep has biological functions, helps us to grow, and helps us to build immunities. The next thing here is more on children and sleep. A child who is overly tired has a harder time falling asleep. Might not make sense, but it is true that when somebody is overly tired, they are just going to get cranky and have a harder time falling asleep. The symptoms of insufficient sleep can be misleading, so we might not always know what they mean. Sleep loss can interfere with development, so it's really important that we help babies to get a good amount of sleep. Another thing on children in sleep is that all children wake up during the night. And sleep loss is cumulative. So you might know this as a high schooler where you can have one night where you don't sleep very well and do okay the next day. But if you have 2 or 3 nights in a row where you don't sleep well, it has a cumulative effect on you and makes it difficult for you to function. Next, we have a slide on safe sleep. And it says that babies spend a good portion of their day sleeping. Actually, from birth to 3 months, babies can sleep for 14 to 17 hours a day, and from 4 to 11 months, 12 to 15 hours a day. I'd also like you to take a moment just to look at this picture and be reminded of what we need to do to help babies sleep safely. First and foremost, we always want to put a baby on their back. We want to use a firm, tight-fitting mattress. We never want to use extra padding, blankets, or pillows under the baby. We want to make sure that we remove pillows, bumpers, and comforters. We want to make sure that we don't use positioning devices. We want to regularly check the crib to make sure it doesn't have any missing or broken parts. We don't want to fix a crib that breaks. And we want to make sure that we place cribs and playpens away from windows so we don't have window covering or falling out the window hazards. The next slide continues safe sleep, and it talks about sudden unexpected infant death syndrome. This is defined as the unexpected death of an infant under 12 months of age. Most of these deaths occur to unsafe sleep environments. There are actually about 3,500 deaths annually attributed to SUID. Types of sudden unexpected infant death include sudden infant death syndrome, suffocation or strangulation, and unknown cause. Again, the graphic here talks about putting babies to sleep on their back, making sure that your home is smoke-free, both before and after birth. Smoking can have very bad effects on children. Practice safe sleeping, a firm surface with no soft bedding. Put the crib or cradle or bassinet next to your bed for convenience and to keep an eye on your baby as they sleep. And it also supports breastfeeding. More on safe sleep. We want to make sure the sleep is safe, having a crib with no moving parts. Simple, no blankets, pillows, stuffed toys, or bumpers. Sleep, make sure we place the baby on their back to sleep, never on their front, always on their back. And if you're in a childcare center where you have multiple cribs or multiple cots, you want to make sure to place them at least 36 inches apart, because this will help to reduce the spread of communicable illnesses if a child sneezes or coughs and their germs come out of their crib or off of their cot. The next slide focuses on infants and crying, and we want to always remember to respond promptly, meaning quickly, and consistently to a baby's cries, because this is going to promote a sense of trust and attachment. If the baby cries and I go to pick them up and respond to them, they're going to know that I'm a person that can be trusted, and they're going to form an attachment with me. Another thing to know about infants and crying is that babies cry to communicate their needs. They're not able to talk to us and say they're hungry, so they're going to cry. They're going to cry when they're hungry, when they need a diaper change, when they need to sleep, when they're bored, when they're hurt, etc. So remember, babies use their crying to communicate with us as caregivers and parents. We're next going to look at some strategies to cope with crying, and then we're going to watch a short video on crying. We want to understand the baby's hunger and sleep cues. So as you get to know babies in your care or your own baby, you're going to begin to understand what they do when they're hungry or when they're tired. One strategy you can do is you can walk with a baby. This gives them a change of scenery, and it lets them be close to you, their caregiver. You could perhaps take the baby for a car ride. You could give the baby a bath or a massage to help them with their crying. You could play music or sing songs to the baby. If you are really stressed, and we're going to see this in the upcoming video, it's best to place the baby on their back in a crib and walk away. This is something we want to do if we're getting really frustrated and we're concerned that we might hurt the baby. We want to put them on their crib, on their back, and walk away. And the last thing here is to call for support. If I'm really stressed out and I'm fearful that I might hurt my baby, I want to call some trusted person who can come and help and support me and my baby. The next thing I would encourage you to all do is to watch this excellent video on infants and crying, and it also gets into shaken baby syndrome, which is a way that babies can die because a parent is frustrated and shakes their baby. After watching that video, you're going to learn about oral hygiene, what you can do to help a baby with their oral development. Oral hygiene is cleaning a baby's gums with a water-soaked gauze pad after feeding, and that's going to stimulate the gum tissue and help prevent tooth decay. Shown in the picture here is a little fingertip toothbrush that you can also use to kind of keep baby's mouth clean after eating. Baby bottle tooth decay is often caused by letting babies fall asleep with a filled bottle. So we don't want to put a baby into their crib with a bottle, with milk, or with juice especially, because that could lead to tooth decay for the baby. Next slide focuses on infant nutrition. And we want to make sure to support mothers who choose to breastfeed. Some mothers choose to and some mothers choose not to, but we want to make sure to support mothers who choose to breastfeed. I shared in class how Erica has had mothers who come by the house on their lunch time so they can breastfeed their babies. So we want to make sure that whenever mom wants to do that, we allow it to happen. We also want to follow a parent's lead on the introduction of solid foods. So babies always start off on bottles or by nursing, and then eventually they will go to solid foods. But we as teachers want to follow the parent's lead on when to introduce those solid foods. Once solid foods are introduced, we want to avoid foods with added sugar. So a couple pictures popped up here. One is supporting the mother who chooses to breastfeed, and then the bottom one, the baby is being spoon-fed with some solid foods when she's ready for that. So you might ask, how do I know when a baby is ready for solid food? And some things to look for would be whether they've doubled in birth weight. So if they started off at 7 pounds and now they're 14 pounds, that could tell you they're ready for solid foods. They have good control of their head and their neck, which is needed for eating. They can sit without support, so perhaps in a high chair. They might start to show an interest in the food that you were eating as an adult. They can show you a signal when they're full. We used to teach our children how to show that they were full with sign language, because this was much better than them just throwing the food on the floor when they were finished. And our last section here are issues and concerns in infant development, part 9. We're going to look at atypical development. So typical is when things are happening as you would expect them to. Atypical is when things are not happening as you would expect them to, and you may have some concerns. What you want to do as a teacher or a parent is use basic child development principles and remember that each child is unique. So remember those principles we develop from head to toe, from midline out, that development is predictable and that development varies. We want to make sure that we're not comparing children. Let's say you've had 2 children. You don't want to compare your second child to your first child because your children might just be developing at different paces. If I'm a classroom teacher, I want to use observations to make informed decisions and communicate with families any concerns. So if I have a concern about a child's development, I want to make sure to talk to the family about that so we can all work together to address any concerns that we have. I've shared on this slide the definition of a developmental delay, and want you to know that if you have an eligible infant or toddler with disabilities, they can receive early intervention services. In Illinois, in this area, we call them birth to 3 services. And this is something that is provided by our state because of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The next thing I have on here is a definition of a developmental delay. So children birth to age 3, we're going to look for any kind of delays that they have in one or more of these areas: physical development, cognitive development, communication, social or emotional development, or adaptive or behavioral development. So if a child is screened and they are behind in one or more of those areas, they can receive services under the IDEA Act. The next thing shown here is a screening tool. So this is a questionnaire, and these questionnaires are for children of all different ages, from birth up to, I think, age 5. And you would do a questionnaire. The teacher could do it or a parent could do it. And it's kind of looking to see if the child is where we believe they should be at the different ages. So it's going to ask you to say, yes, they always do this, no, they never do this, or they sometimes do this. And it's going to help us to figure out if the baby that's our own or the baby in our care is developing typically, or if we might have some concerns. Finally, we've made it to the end of the module. And this slide just shows all the different parts that we learned in this module. I thank you for watching and ask you to be sure to turn in your module workbook at the end of this, and also tell me that the end word was taco. When you tell me that it's taco, I know that you watched the entire video. Thank you.